Hi and welcome to Fun Swedish. Time for some positive vibes. If you feel like Swedish is super hard, then I want to let you know that you actually know more Swedish than you think. There are lots of words from English or just international words that you can use when speaking Swedish. So let's go through some tips and tricks that you can use to cheat with your Swedish vocabulary. Looks like English but pronounced the Swedish way. If it's lunchtime in Sweden, then you will find lots of words that look exactly like English. For example, the word lunch, which is easy to understand, but to make it 100% Swedish, then you need to put some Swedish spice into it. So we say lunch instead of lunch. Some other exact copies that you might see during lunch, but of course pronounced the Swedish way, are pizza, kebab, pasta, ketchup. Things that go together, right, Italians? Yet, words that are an exact copy from English are not limited to lunchtime. We also have words like normal, total, problem och president. But I'm sure you notice that the pronunciation of these words in Swedish is a bit different. A bit more Swedish. And also, most of these words are not originally Swedish, because we keep the Viking tradition of stealing things, or maybe borrowing it. That's why these words are also called borrow words. And when we do that, in most cases, we put the stress on the last syllable. That is why we say problem and not problem, or total instead of total. And a bit of a warning here. Do not get lazy with your Swedish pronunciation. If you get it right, they might think that you're Swedish as well. If you say it instead the English way, then they will hear right away that you're not Swedish. So remember, put the stress in the last syllable for these words. There is of course more to Swedish pronunciation than just this. And if you want to know all the Swedish pronunciation rules to sound more Swedish, then you should take our video course for beginners. The link is up here and in the description below. Next category, the opposite of the previous one. Words that sound just like English but written the Swedish way. For example, the word date. If you're asking someone out for a date, then it sounds exactly the same in Swedish. Date. Vill du gå på en date med mig? But as you can see, the word date is written in a totally different way. A way that makes sense in Swedish. Otherwise, if you write it the English way, the Swede will probably read it as date. And there are of course more words that works like this. Mail, okay, fake. This category is great if you're just improvising when talking to someone in Swedish, since it doesn't really matter that it's written differently because the pronunciation is the same. Plus, these words will make it sound a bit cool and hip. Since these words often come into the Swedish language thanks to TV shows, games and internet culture. Next category. C becomes K. Swedes prefer K over C. So sometimes the only thing you need to do to have a Swedish word is to change the C to a K. Like in these words. Perfect becomes perfekt, doctor becomes doktor, and clinic becomes klinik. But of course, just like in our first category, here we need to add a little bit of Swedish pronunciation to these words as well.
I am from Sweden. No, yes, it has a very different cadence in Sweden. We talk, the melody is very different.
So remember to put the stress in the last syllable. Now things get a little bit trickier. Next category. Skip the last E in Swedish. There are a lot of English words that end with an E. That can also become Swedish words if you remove the E in the end. Here are some examples. Temperature becomes temperatur. Alternative becomes alternativ. Minute becomes minut. Mobile becomes mobil. And medicine becomes medicin. Again here, in most of these words, we change the stress to the last syllable. And maybe also we throw in some Swedish sounding vowels. And you are done. You're speaking Swedish. And to be fair, these English words should never have ended with an E. I mean, you don't even say the word E in the word active or medicine. So Swedish makes more sense here at least. Next category is the opposite of the previous one. Now we are adding stuff. In this case, we just add an A. When using verbs, actions, Swedish verbs end with an A or A in Swedish when we have the infinitive form. And since we like to borrow verbs from other languages as well, and to make these verbs completely Swedish, then we just add an A to them. For example, testa, to test, ringa, to ring, as in call someone, plinga, to pling, streama, to stream, and even googla. Next category. Change the Y for an I or a J. In this category, we have many months. For example, January becomes Januari, February becomes Februari, May becomes Maj, and July becomes Juli. Like you might have noticed, with most of these categories, most of these words in these categories are really from a Latin or a Greek origin. So English has borrowed them as well. So if you don't really know the Swedish word, just take a chance. Take one of these universal words, make it sound more Swedish, and throw it into your sentence. You might even sound extra smart in Swedish, since many of these borrowed words from Latin sounds more sophisticated in Swedish. For example, if you want to delete something, then you can say the word eliminera in Swedish, which sounds a lot more fancy than the Swedish version ta bort. You might not know the word ta bort, but you surely know the word eliminate. Next category. Double the last consonant. Because of Swedish pronunciation rules, for some words to look and sound right, we need to double consonants. Words like bus and hotel are almost the same in English, but with the final consonant written twice. And now, our final category, drunk English. Sometimes Swedish looks like drunk English, like when you're drunk, trying to write a message in English, but you're too drunk to get the spelling right. That is Swedish sometimes. This happens when we start combining all the previous categories, and maybe some more. For example, medal becomes medalj, university becomes universitet, to game becomes gamea, telephone becomes telefon, and there is many other examples. Can you think of any other Swedish words that look a lot like English? Maybe a combination of all these categories. Write them down in the comment section below. Hope to see many of them. And before you go, don't forget to put a like and subscribe to our channel if you haven't done it yet. Hej då!